Today we want to discuss the challenges of taking forest landscape restoration to scale by looking at some of the key lessons from China's decades of experience in this area. The cover photograph summarises some of these key lessons. The photograph was taken at the Wanglian Forest Farm in Inner Mongolia. 60 years ago, this area was a barren, denuded hill slope. It was then replanted with a plantation monoculture. More recently, considerable efforts have been made to transform the area into a multi-species, multi-function forest. We'll start by looking at some of the challenges China faced that led to the initiation of its large-scale ecoforestry programs. For millennia, China's forests have suffered as human populations and economic activities grew. Historically, many authors have described China as an archetype example of a society that has been unable to prevent almost complete deforestation. This was particularly the case in the last 2 centuries or so, as China suffered invasion by colonial powers and the deprivations of war. By the time of the emergence of modern China in 1949, forest cover had declined to just 8.6% of national forest area. This decline in forest area was accompanied by major environmental problems such as soil erosion, lost farmland productivity, desertification, extensive dust storms, stream sedimentation, periodic flooding, and the loss of biodiversity. When we look at the pictures in the slide, we can see the scale of this challenge. The picture on the right shows an eroded landscape in the Laos Plateau before restoration activities had started. The picture on the left, taken in 1953, shows the encroachment of sandlands into agricultural farms and farm infrastructure. With these worsening environmental problems, China has launched 16 large-scale ecoforestry projects, beginning with the Three North Forest Shelterbed Program in 1978. This initial program was vast in both scale and ambition. It covered some 4 million square kilometres, 42% of China's land area, and over 551 counties and 13 provinces. Its planning horizon was similarly vast, 73 years in 8 phases. After a series of catastrophic environmental disasters in the late 1990s, such as flooding in the Yangtze River and unprecedented dust storms in major urban areas like Beijing, 15 new ecoforestry programs were launched, including the National Forest Conservation Program and the Grain for Green program. Between 1998 and 2015, these programs attracted support of over $378 billion US. They are proceeding with annual support of $40 billion, or approximately 0.37% of China's GDP. The programs have supported interventions of various kinds over 600 million hectares, or 62% of China's national land area. Their collective impact is seen in the increase in forest area and coverage in the graph. We will now look in more detail at some of the activities focusing on the Three North program area. One of the features of the Three North program, and indeed a number of the other ecoforestry programs, has been a focus on farmland and infrastructure shelter beds. By 2015, the Three North program had established 2.8 million hectares of these shelter bed forests. These in turn protected 30 million hectares of farmland and have led to the reclamation of 15 million hectares of farmland and pasture. The Chinese Academy of Science has estimated that as much of 20% of the national increase in grain harvest over the last 40 years has been due to the establishment of farmland shelter beds. We are now going to look in a little bit more detail at the experience of the village shown towards the back of this photograph. The village shown in the photograph is the village of Xinhu in Heilongjiang province. 40 years ago, it was surrounded by bare land, just one Chinese elm tree. Now, with the establishment of the shelter beds, more than 10% of the village area is covered by forests. Before the shelter beds were established, there was low land productivity with crop yields of only between 600 and 750 kilograms per hectare. That is now lifted to between 7,500 and 9,000 kilograms per hectare. Consequent with that improvement in yield incomes have improved more than 20-fold from $60 per capita per year to $1,350 per person. The living conditions in the village have been dramatically improved by the shelter beds. The chairman of the village, who's shown in the picture and the photograph, told me that when he was a young boy, it was a very unpleasant place to live, particularly in winter. Harsh winds, sand being driven into the houses, totally unpleasant living conditions. Now with the establishment of the forest shelter beds, the environment has been considerably improved. The example of Dings Gully is another success growing from the Free North program. It's also very similar to the sorts of interventions that have been supported under the Green for Grain program. When we look at the picture on the screen, it was formerly eroded cropland with deep gullying and low agricultural productivity. It's a good demonstration of landscape level land use planning. If you look at the photograph, you'll see there's a good mix of integrated blocks of forest plantings on the steeper slopes, shelter bed plantings around the agricultural fields, riparian zone plantings along streamlines, all backed by conservation tillage. Another example of achievement at scale is the erosion control programs on the Laos Plateau. Under the Free North program, 9.6 million hectares of watershed protection forests have been established in this region. As a result, sediment loads in the Yellow River have fallen by as much as 90%. When you look at the photograph, you can see a lot of small white dots. They're actually pits where trees have been established. So again, you can see landscape level reforestation. Another feature of this program has been the incorporation of economic crops with the restoration plantings to improve livelihoods of communities living in the program areas. A good example of this incorporation of economic crops with protective tree planting in the Laos Plateau is given by the gentleman shown in the photograph here, Dao Zhengnan. This man was originally contracted to plant some 700 hectares of degraded hillsides. However, he took extended leases and planted mosaics of economic crops, apricots, walnuts, apples, with the shelter bed forest to generate an annual income of more than $30,000 per year. Again, that integrated focus is really important. One size doesn't fit all situations. Another key focus of the Free North program has been sandland management to control and combat desertification. Under the program, some 3.4 million hectares of sandland were brought under management and converted to fertile farmland. As a result, China's sandlands are now reducing by about 150,000 hectares per year. A key feature of the program is protection of villages and key infrastructure such as roads, railway lines, power lines through the process of sand stabilisation. The photograph illustrates this program, or at least the beginning of the process. You can see straw is being dug into the ground. This creates a grid across the landscape, and in the cells of the grid, trees or other forms of vegetation are planted. In some cases, simply establishing the grid has been enough to encourage natural regeneration. There have been many drivers of the success that China has achieved. One of the most important has been the sustained political and budgetary support given by governments at all levels. Forest restoration is seen as a key societal function, similar to education, health, defence and infrastructure. The program couldn't have been successful without mass mobilisation and the participation of rural residents. In the early days, China's commune structure facilitated this. In the latter period, as China's moved towards a more market economy, incentives have played an increasingly important role. The focus on livelihoods was discussed before, and this has been central to providing those incentives. There's certainly been many development partnerships that have aided the programs develop. Bilateral assistance from multilateral organisations from the World Bank have been important. This has facilitated the documentation of lessons learned and assisted the process of learning by doing. What are the lessons learned that might assist people attempting forest restoration in areas outside China? To us, there are 6 key lessons. The first is that significant progress in the management, conservation, development and restoration of forests is possible. Countries can move from pledges, pious hopes, to plausible possibilities and indeed desirable outcomes. The importance of ongoing political leadership and consistent budgetary support has been stressed. Environmental sustainability has to be a long-term commitment like education, health, defence and infrastructure spending. Practitioners need to look beyond just planting trees to securing ecosystem function. In China, practices changed over the last 40 years. Initially, there was almost exclusive reliance on planting plantation monocultures. As understanding of systems grew, reliance on assisted natural regeneration, rehabilitation of grasslands where that's a more appropriate land cover are now common practices. We've stressed the need for multi-stakeholder, whole-of-society approaches. Monitoring and evaluation is also important to ensure that programs are on track and that the lessons learnt from experience are being documented. Research and development is really essential for adaptive management. When China started its programs, forest science was not well developed. However, much has been learnt over the last 4 decades, and now the challenge is to incorporate this new knowledge in field practice. Thank you for listening to this presentation. We will conclude with a short video highlighting some of the activities in the 3 North program area. One of the important principles of the 3 North Shelterbed Development Program is the protection of existing forests. This morning we're at Herlong Mountain National Forest Park, which is protecting some of the existing natural forests here in this very dry part of the country. Learning, experimenting, innovating will continue, and that there's every prospect that this will be sustainable into the future, not only for the present generation, but for future generations as well.